Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai, ko teina huza tōku ingoa. I am NDF board member and the Communications, Digital and Design Specialist for Queensland Museum. I am extremely pleased to be hosting this webinar today with Maia Miller from Aleph Accessibility. Before we get stuck into that though, first of all, some house rules. So as you all seem to already know, you're being very behaved at the moment. Please keep yourself muted. Please keep your cameras off so we can focus on our speaker, and you can ask questions at any time. Just pop them in the chat. So feel free to pop them in the chat, and at the end of the session we should have, hopefully if time goes about right, we should have about 10 minutes to answer your questions. Maia and myself may be able to stay on a few minutes extra if we're running long as well. This session is recorded, so if you or someone you know has registered for the session, they will receive an email with a copy of the recording, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel at some point in the near future. So, welcome to Accessibility Through AI, and I say AI with a question mark, as Maia has given us. So let me introduce her. I'm very pleased to introduce Maia, the Managing Director of Aleph Accessibility. She is an IAAP certified web accessibility specialist with deep technical knowledge and clear practical approach to accessibility. Maia is great at breaking down complex ideas and making them easy to understand, and she brings a thoughtful, grounded perspective to product development. Her focus is always on useful, realistic strategies that help teams build accessibility into their work in a meaningful way. I'm going to hand over to Maia now.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Kia ora, everybody. I guess I'll just launch right into it. There's construction happening like near me, so I hope the audio is fine, and just, I don't know, say something if not, and I can close some things. So let's dive right in. Like Tano was saying, it's a question we're asking about accessibility. Can we achieve accessibility goals using AI? We know that there's a lot of hype out there about AI, and so I think that's, we ask important questions like that and how to solve important issues that we're dealing with. So exactly, like, what is this issue that we're dealing with, or, you know, what are we trying to address here? If you're at this accessibility talk, you probably have a sense of accessibility at this point. In New Zealand, the disability rate is 1 in 4. So 1 in 4 people in New Zealand identify as having a disability. Put in another context, that's 1 million people, or the entire population of Auckland. And we know that this number is a minimum because this is only people who have, you know, indicated on a census the level of support that they need. But disability actually has quite a far reach. You know, we could think of things like permanent, temporary, or situational disabilities. For example, if I broke my hand, so I am a right-handed person, if I broke my right hand or my right arm, that would impact the way that I use technology. Hopefully I'll recover from that, which makes it a temporary disability, but it still will impact me in that way. We have physical things like our vision, mobility, and hearing, which those are the things we might think about when we think of disability. But we also have neurodiversity and cognitive and learning disabilities. I'm sure that we ourselves, or we know people who are ADHD or autistic or on a spectrum somewhere, and if not officially, then at least, you know, ponders the think that they are, you know. And so the accessibility improvements that we make help our neurodiverse friends. And finally, another population to think about is the older population. You know, as we age, it's natural that our eyesight gets weaker, our dexterity gets weaker, our hearing, our cognition. That's just a natural part of aging. And as a result, accessibility improvements that we make help people who are older. And now, before we start thinking about older people as, you know, some white-haired person perched over a walker, which, you know, it can include that as well. The population that we're actually talking about, the almost 50% of the population age 60 plus has a disability in New Zealand, or 65 plus. And 65 plus, that's my mom. And depending on, you know, what your demographic is, that might be your parents as well. So when we're talking about this older population, we're not talking about, you know, some distant or, you know, small group. It's actually quite a significant group of people. And actually, probably a lot of us are connected to them as well. And so when we are looking at the population that we have is, 1 in 4 at a very minimum, but we can start to understand how more and more people actually fall under disability and would value accessibility improvements. Um, they're being blocked from doing the things that they can and want to do every day. So if I broke my hand, I will have difficulty. I might want to do my grocery shopping online, specifically because I have an injury, and I still need to eat. And so making sure that that website is accessible. Neurodiverse people make events interesting and creative and colorful, and we want to make sure that they can buy or at least register to webinars held by NDF so that they can continue the work that they're doing in their day-to-days. I had a coworker who was blind in one eye and loved video games. And finally, someone who's like my mom in her retirement age, it's really important that she's able to engage with banking so that she can maintain, her financial independence at that age. So then we have this situation and this context that we're in, and then AI comes around. And so we have to ask the question, well, can AI improve accessibility? So, I mean, at one degree, yes, it absolutely can. And we've seen it already. Predictive text has been around for a really long time. That's when you're texting on your phone and you have messages coming up. You can see that. I'm going to close the door because I think it might be loud. So just give me a second. Sorry, one sec. Okay. If it wasn't bothering you, it was bothering me. All right. So AI, it's already been helping us with accessibility so far. With predictive text, it's been there, and that's really great for people who have cognitive disabilities, dyslexia, being able to write that CV. So that they can get the job that they deserve, or that email in that way that really like presents them as the professional that they are. We've seen it with voice recognition. Voice recognition like Siri and things like that were actually invented specifically for people who have disabilities, mobility disabilities specifically, being able to talk to their technologies in order to be able to activate it. So that's been around for a while. And then, because of those two things probably combined together, we've got auto captioning and transcripts. And probably because of COVID, that kind of ushered a lot of advancement in the auto captioning and transcripting so that, everybody's able to benefit from videos, whether it's live or pre-recorded, to have those captioning there. And of course, like, why stop at just text? So we see now today as well technologies that are translating text into sign language. Companies and they're using avatars. So you don't even need to use real people. They're using, again, AI technologies to be able to interpret that text into another language to make information even more accessible to more people. Accessibility also has to do a lot with images. So images is one of the top 5 issues on the web, like images with no alt text. And I'm sure if you're working in the content space, that images and creating alternative text can be really like a lot of work. And so AI can address that area. I've used ChatGPT. I just took a photo that I had and dropped it into ChatGPT, and it gave me some alt text for it. Granted, the alt text is a bit verbose, so I would probably want to go through it and alter it to make sure that it's really accurate to the image that I inputted there. But that's pretty good. It's better. It's better than nothing, right? It's better than, or at least it's better than starting from scratch. That way, I have something to work off of. And this, companies have found that this was actually quite useful. In fact, a company called Scribely decided that they wanted to make this what they do. So they use AI to bulk generate image alt text. Now, they do caveat that what they focus a lot on is the operationalization, there you go, of image descriptions. So it's about that operation process behind it. And they do still talk about using humans to validate the alt text there. But it's taking something that, where you have a lot and making it easier to apply alt text to it. In terms of images, there's even more as well. So images of text are really inaccessible, particularly for people with low vision or who are blind, who are using screen readers, because a screen reader can't interpret an image. A screen reader can't interpret the text of an image. And then an image itself, if you zoom in, it gets blurry as well. So that's why we always advocate for text being actually text. But oftentimes you'll see an image of text as like a menu, for example, of a restaurant. And with AI, you can interpret those images into text. So, for example, if you're going to a restaurant, maybe a cheeky date, and you want to read the menu ahead of time so you get a sense of where you're going, now somebody can take that menu and put it into ChatGPT and be able to access the image that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. And again, a company thought that this was really valuable and has started to implement it. So there's a company called Be My Eyes that they've now implemented Be My AI. Be My Eyes is a company that connects volunteers with people who need vision assistance. So if you're at the grocery store, for example, and you're picking up a can of beans, and you need to tell if it's black beans or red beans, the labels are pretty much the same, and it's just a change of color and like one word, and you have difficulty seeing it. So you can use Be My Eyes, call a volunteer, or connect you to a volunteer, and then you can just ask, I'm looking for black beans. Can you tell me which one of these is the one that I'm looking for? Volunteer can be really helpful, point you in the right direction. Bob's your uncle. So it's really helpful. And so using AI, you can do a very similar thing. And what's even better about that is that you then don't even have to ask a person, which can be really great for, if you don't really feel like interacting with somebody, you're not feeling particularly social, or that social battery isn't there. It's also really good for things like privacy. So you can do your banking and your medical things without sharing that kind of information. Or even just what your grocery list is. Why do you have to tell everybody that? So it provides a lot of independence and empowerment to individuals so that they don't have to be asking other people all the time. And like if going on the theme was why stop there with just images, we can also be using moving images, so videos. So there's also similarly companies that are taking videos and creating audio descriptions from that. And there's questions around it, around that, about audio description and how exactly to do it, and opinions about AD in and of itself. But at least there's companies who are trying to do it. So with that, will we use AI to solve accessibility? It's done, right? Well, given that we still have a lot to talk about, the answer is probably no. So let's unpack this a little bit. So first off, when it comes to the technology that we talked about, it's important that we have alternatives and that we also are critical about the accuracy. So first, let's talk about the alternatives. So things like all of the examples that I provided, so text input, speech input, there's always an alternative. So if, for example, you're talking to your Siri or whatever it is, and it's not really understanding what you're saying, for example, I have a North American accent, and so those technologies have been built based on my kind of accent. But I'm sure that you, as many Kiwis in the room, have experienced that sometimes those auto transcribing services and the text speech things don't really understand what you're saying sometimes. So being able to provide an alternative, you can just pick up your phone and then enter what you actually want it to say, is really important. That's true for accents, but it's also true for things like if you have a stutter or you have a speech deficiency. Let's say you had a stroke and it impacts the way that you speak. The technologies might not understand that kind of speech. So having the ability to interact in different ways is really important. And the same is true with mobility things when it comes to like if it's just a purely mobile thing, like physical like inputs. And then we also have the accuracy. Now, I don't need to go on and on about the hallucinations and the overconfidence that AI has. I'm sure you've all heard about that plenty of times and experienced it. So, but we do need to know that that is a thing. And one of the issues is the overconfidence in those hallucinations, which makes it really difficult to know whether it is a hallucination to begin with, especially if you're blind and you're relying on this technology to see for you. How do you make sure that it can see for you and it's seeing accurately, right? So we need to be thinking about that accuracy there. And that's when I was talking about that AI company that uses alt text, or sorry, the company that uses AI for alt text. Um, they rely on human verification, and oftentimes you'll need human verification as well. If you've ever seen transcripts of things, adjusting them and making sure that the wording is correct and the timing is correct, that's always really important as well. But let's talk a bit more about that accuracy as well, because I think there's a little bit more to unpack. So let's talk about how AI actually works. What is it? Because when we talk about AI, there's a lot of hype around it, as we know, and a lot that is this magical machine. But when we talk about AI, what we're talking about is large language models, which essentially is about predicting the next probable word. So what LLMs are really good at is recognizing patterns. And in fact, that's something that humans are really bad at. We're quite notoriously bad at prediction and probability, recognizing patterns, but that's what the technology is really good at. Humans, though, are really good at context-based problem solving. So when we look at digital accessibility, we have to think about what kind of thinking does digital accessibility need? And that'll tell us what AI can and can't do for us in that space. So with this question, I have an example. So I have a component on a screen. It's an eye with a circle around it. So think in your head, what this component is. It's usually an information icon of some sort. So what would the alt text of this image be? Probably in something like information, right? So image and then alt equals information. But what if this icon appeared next to like a question in an input field? So it was actually an interactive element. So it indicated, you click on it and then you can see like more information about the question that's being asked. Well, in that case, then the alt text should be not just information, but it should be relevant to the question. So, what's your favorite robot? And then the alt text is, well, what is a robot, for example? But what if the same icon was next to a bunch of text, and next to that text, it had the word information? Well, in that case, the icon is a purely visual cue, is just to let sighted users see that there's an information banner. But we already have the word information there, which is a duplicate. So we actually don't need to provide any alt text at all in that case. So that alt text would be blank. And this extends beyond how not just the content there, but also how we would code it up. So this same element might be marked up as an image, but if it was interactive, we would mark it up as a button or as a link. And if it was decorative, we would use a more appropriate method of implementing it, something like a pseudo selector. So, and these are just some of the questions that we would ask about this component. There's lots more about, like what's the relationship that it has with other elements on the page. So, that has to do with the word information next to it, right? What state does it have? So the icon being like a button, we need to know whether that's expanded or collapsed because we need to indicate to screen reader users that something has been opened or closed. And then the tabbing and reading order. Let's move into keyboard, right? Like that's a whole realm. There's tons of people who interact just with keyboard. So, is it in the right tabbing order? What is the expected behavior? A button and a link are triggered by different things. So what is spacebar? If you hit spacebar on it, what is it supposed to do, right? And is it doing what it's supposed to do? And then you have things like focus state and color contrast. So there's a whole bunch of different elements around just this one component that we need to ask and we need to understand in order to make sure that we're representing it properly on screen. Another example is an image, right? Like we have images all the time on the web, and probably if you're a content creator, then you're using images and writing alt text all the time for images. The question is, what is the significant part of the image? I have an image on screen and there's a whole different things that can be significant. It looks like it's a family that has some children there in a living room, but it's a bird's eye view of it. There's a child playing a drum, another one where the adult is throwing one of the children in the air out of joy, not out of anything else. So what is the purpose of this image? Is it about family? Is it about music or dancing? Is it a promotional image about like, look at how much space these people have that they can dance and throw children in the air in their home? So knowing the context of this image is really important to be able to describe it accurately on the web, which tells us that when it comes to digital content, context matters. And then so when we look back at AI, is it really good? And in fact, I asked ChatGPT and it told me that what AI struggles with is ambiguous and content dependent contexts. And we can see this when it comes to looking at different alt text generations. So there are a few articles online, and I know that Tina and Holly are going to be posting a bunch of links, where some people have spent the time comparing different AI models and how they generate AI and generate images based on one or the other. So, not all AIs are created equal either. And that impacts the way that they are going to interpret context. So when we're thinking about AI and using AI for accessibility and for digital as a whole, what we need to be thinking about is what problem are we trying to solve? Is it a pattern and probability issue situation, or is it more of a context-based situation? Sometimes, depending on what your problem is, AI can be a really good solution for it. When it comes to digital accessibility, I would argue that a lot of digital has to do with context-based problem solving, and there's a little bit of patterns and probability in there, and that's where sometimes the bulk alt text generation can come in, for example. But there is still a lot of that context base there. Now let's dive in a little bit more into AI, because I think there's still a little bit more there. Because how does it learn is the question. Because let's say we are using it for that sliver where it is about patterns and probability, and maybe even a little bit of the context-based stuff, just because we're pressed for time. So if we are using AI, how does it learn? Well, it learns off of data sets, right? What are those data sets? So the data sets, there's an organization called WebAIM. It's Web Accessibility in Mind is what it stands for. And they do a project every year where they scan 1 million of the top homepages. This is automated scans, but they do it every single year. And it's a really great way to get numbers and data on just the state of accessibility compliance this year. So it's quite current. And so they did their scan for this past year, and they found that 95% of homepages are inaccessible. And the average number of bugs on a homepage is 51 bugs per homepage. And that's only automatically detected issues. So that's not things that require a human to be doing manual testing, things like focus order, making sure things like are logical, that the keyboard behavior is behaving like we're supposed to, things that we were talking about before. So this is the data set that AI is learning off of. And then we're expecting AI to create code and content that is accessible when it's learning off of inaccessible content. And 95% of homepages, like that's an enormous amount, right? And the way that AI works is about pattern recognition. And so when it sees 95%, that's the norm, right? The 5% that are accessible, those are the outliers. And when AI is meant to be recognizing patterns and probability, it is unlikely that those 5 outlier percent is the correct answer. So it's more likely to amplify the wrong things. And we see this amplifying the wrong things in other contexts as well. So there's a content creator called named Jeremy Andrew Davis. And he did an experiment where he asked Midjourney to create an image for him of an autistic person. And out of the 148 images that was generated by Midjourney, only 2 of them were female presenting. Only 5 were over the age of 30. All of them were white, and none of them were smiling. AI trains on biased data. These are the data sets that we're giving AI that it's learning off of, and then it's using that data to create other content. And in fact, it's biased data. It's also it's ableist data in that context. And frankly, there's a lot of studies actually that show that it's not just ableist, but it's also racist and sexist as well. So this is the data that we're inputting into it. So we need to be thinking about that when we're deciding to use AI. I mean, another question is, where does AI even get those data sets from? So it's largely from public sources, right? So we talked about those 95% of homepages that are not accessible. Other places that it's getting data sources from is things like Stack Overflow and GitHub. Those are coding resources that people will, Stack Overflow, people will post questions and people will answer them. But those haven't been verified. In fact, Stack Overflow can be filled with inaccurate information. GitHub is where we store data, store our code repository. So I can have a GitHub that I've made public that has all of my code in it. That's not been verified for accessibility. It's just my personal projects, me and all of the other devs and students as well who are creating a bunch of stuff. But this is what AI is training off of. So that's not accessible either. And there's other ethical implications as well that I think, because we're in the public, we're talking about the public sector, that I think is significant to the public sector and that we just want to be aware of as well. There's a lot of copyright challenges happening against AI right now that involves basically all major AI companies and basically every single field. So on screen, I just have a screenshot from a website of all of the AI copyright lawsuits happening in the US. And of course, this is in the US where everybody sues everybody, but it's also where AI is really, taking a lot of space and a lot of things are happening. So it is a good indicator of what's going on. And we're seeing lawsuits from anywhere from musicians and authors to voice actors, photographers, the whole gamut of people who have been creating content in every single way, is because AI is using their content without asking them. And so when we're asking AI, for example, to generate an image for something, it's using images that other people have created, photographers have created, designers have created, and posted on their portfolios elsewhere, other websites. It's taking that content and regurgitating it into its own thing. And what's the copyright on those images? That's the question there. There's also ethical concerns we have to think about in terms of Te Ao Māori. I'm by no means any expert in it, but the New Zealand, the Māori data and AI guidance says that basically we should avoid using Māori data for AI training without explicit permissions and ensure transparency how data is presented. Based on this website, the idea is that it has to do with sovereignty and the idea that Māori data is not considered just to belong to an individual, but it's considered to belong to an entire whānau. So it needs explicit permission. So if you're existing in this space, again, I'm by no means an expert, and you should probably talk to an expert and find out what the implications are of using Māori data for AI training. There's a whole bunch of other ethical implications of AI. My favorite source was a Sydney-based tech coach. He did a whole talk on AI as a hype-fueled dumpster fire that will burn the planet down and get you thrown in jail. It's a purposely clickbaity topic, but he does a really good job of exploring the moral questions and just poses it as a question of balancing benefits and harms and how we want to engage with it, not necessarily prescribing one way or the other, but just giving us a sense of the things that we should be thinking about. And so I think his talk is really good next step from this talk. That we're focused here on accessibility, but that's another consideration if you want to explore that avenue further. And in the New Zealand context specifically, there is a public service AI framework as well. Again, this is a bit outside of the scope of accessibility, but it's kind of part and parcel is just thinking about how we're using AI in the public service, in the public sector. Things about inclusive sustainable development, the idea of like reducing social, gender, and other inequalities, that directly has to do with accessibility. And if we're using AI that is gendered and biased and inaccessible, are we really making inclusive, sustainable development? Transparency and explainability, all these kind of things. So that's a really good guidance as well if you're thinking about AI beyond the context of just accessibility. Okay, but let's come back to the topic that we're at hand. We're talking about AI, we're talking about, but more specifically about accessibility. So we've talked about some good things and some tools that we can use and that are being used. But then there's also the very real challenges and considerations that we need to have when it comes to legal stuff, but also the bias and the context that is really important for accessibility. Where does that leave us? What do we do with that? I was talking to a colleague, and she said something that I thought was just great and really captured it. Her name is Lauren Hayes. She's an accessibility specialist, and she is fully blind. And what she said was, "We've been starved for information for so long. We'll take what we can get." And I think that really captures it, because it's the idea that as a disabled person, you just want to engage with the content that is being provided. And so there's new technologies coming out, this AI, a bunch of AI stuff that is promoting, saying that you can engage with things. And then also, on the flip side is us as creators and technologists who are trying to create content that is accessible. And we're desperate to have something that is accessible. And so, we hear that AI can solve our problems, so we jump to it. But we jump to it at the compromise, maybe, of the other implications involved, because we're so desperate for those solutions. The things like bias and copyright and Maori sovereignty and the hallucinations, that's when we start to have to balance those together. In the meantime, we have websites that have consistently had the exact same errors for the last 5 years. So again, the WebA1,000,000 project has identified that it's the same 5 types of errors that have existed on web pages. Sorry, there's 6 on screen. So the same errors have existed for the last 5 years. Those are the numbers. For the last 5 years, we had the exact same errors over and over again. And that has been before AI existed as well. So while we're trying to solve our problems with AI, there's other things that we can look to and see that we don't need AI to solve all of our problems. If we fix these 6 issues, we'll solve significant amount of accessibility barriers on the web. We have accessibility automation. So Aleph Accessibility has an article all about this, that you can use to implement in your process that makes at least gives you like a safety net of accessibility. So that's things like scanners, linting tools if you're a coder, Figma plugins if you're a designer. We have color contrast checkers, a bunch of extensions that throughout the entire process, we can use these accessibility automated tools that will enhance our accessibility practice. And it is still automation. It's only going to catch some things, but we can do that, and that's apart from AI, and it doesn't involve a lot of ethical implications, and it's something that we still can do. So when we're talking about accessibility and AI, I think what the takeaways that I would recommend, one is, I would say, do what's possible now. Like what I was just talking about, there's automation that exists. There's really well-known bugs that exist regardless of AI. We don't need AI to solve those problems. We can eliminate a lot of barriers without implicating AI, and without, all the implications that come with AI. I think in addition to that, if we are venturing down the AI path, and when it comes to accessibility, taking that balanced approach and understanding what the implications are, specifically on the ethical bias, Māori rights approach, we need to make sure that we're balanced, that we fully understand all of the implications. And then finally, I think that time is on our side. I think that there is a bunch of hype about AI, and we want to rush to implement it right away. But the more that we just take a step back, the better that we can have a bigger picture understanding of what AI is and is not, what it presents to us in a positive way, but also what it presents to us in that negative, or at least that kind of sketchy way. And it also gives us a little bit of time to recognize what solutions are AI-driven solutions and what solutions can we implement, and we don't really need AI. We just need to be thinking about accessibility and looking at the state of what we have now and seeing what we can do instead. Thank you.
Thanks, Maia. That was excellent. Okay, so now we have some time for questions. So if you have any, pop your questions in the chat. We have a couple here that have been sent through previously. You can also, because I don't think there's too many of us, Holly might disagree, but if you want to raise your hand as well, that would be fine. Um, well, I'm going to start with a question that was sent through earlier, and I just need to, it's a bit of a long one, so just forgive me while I read it out. So this is from, actually, I don't have the person's name, forgive me, but they would like to know if there is any research into the use of AI to generate audio descriptions for museum displays and objects. Their comment is audio descriptions are currently slow and expensive to produce, but are made by highly skilled people working in the accessibility sector. They can see how AI could generate descriptions in text and audio formats quickly, cheaply, and even in multiple languages. However, as you've mentioned, be concerned about the ethics of allowing AI to determine what is important in a display or an object and the loss of work for skilled and empathetic describers.
Yeah, I think that last point really like underscored it. I think particularly, I mean, in addition to all the things that I've said about the accuracy of we'll just call it alt text, like alternative text. So whether that's an image or video, and then whether that's said out loud or in text, so just alternative text. The accuracy is a concern. And then in terms of like museums, there's the curation, right, is a whole like field and a whole art and skill, right? And so we don't just say it's a vase and that's it. There's a lot more that's involved to describing the significance of it. And that's what a curator and the specialists are there for. And so asking an AI to generate that context without that specialized knowledge, you'll get what you pay for, kind of thing. I think that there's also implications as well in terms of um, cultural sensitivities. Again, a vase isn't just a vase, it's representative of a certain culture and it comes from a certain context. And thinking about where AI has been generated and like trained and what data sets it's been trained off of, realistically, it's from a Western perspective. It's probably from a North American Western perspective. It's probably from a North American white Western perspective. And so if we're trying to represent in our museums um, different cultures and the nuance from that. Um, you know, I would ask questions about who you're hiring, quote unquote, that AI to do it. That being said, you're balancing priorities and payoffs. So if having at least a groundwork is valuable to you, and then you can work off of there. So instead of having your curators and specialists starting from scratch, they have something to work off of that can be valuable. You can also train your own AI agents to do that. And there was a slide in there, and that was the value of having the comparative. Different AIs perform differently, and that's because they're trained off of different things. So having your own AI or using an AI, but practicing with a bunch of different ones and seeing what kind of output you're getting, that can also yield different results, and maybe ones that are more favorable to what you're looking for.
Yeah, that ties into the question here we've got in the chat, which is from Rowan, and it says, I've heard folks say AI is great with getting patterns from context if it's trained on limited data sets. So that's what you're talking about, a controlled data set rather than these universal
Yeah.
global ones. Do you think that's accurate?
I think it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Like if you're trying to control, for example, that bias, you're trying to control a certain tone, then yeah, because it's learning off of something and it's just pulling patterns, rather than saying just take all the slop from the internet and then base it off of that. Because I mean, that's what slop is like and if you look up like AI generated slop images, it you see that it's like garbage, but it ends up exacerbating and exaggerating certain biases. So if you're trying to avoid those biases, then having your own custom AI can do that. I don't know the full extent of what it means to have your own AI, like how much you have to train it. So that's something that I guess to look into exactly how limited that data set is. Is it really learning from scratch, and what does that mean learning from scratch? Because there's certain algorithm, it's still starting from something. You're not building it literally from scratch. So yeah, but that could be a way of circumventing it, but then it like also raises the question of like, if you're going to invest a bunch of time and energy into building and training an AI, can you also build not build, but can you train like your devs and your content creators and your curators, and how much effort and energy and resources are you investing in AI when really accessibility is not a technology problem, it's a social problem. It's about our mentalities and our approaches to accessibility. It's think like, whether we think it's just like slap a sticker on it and it's fixes the problem, versus it comes way earlier in the design and ideation phases when we're thinking about, what is going to be our display, how are we going to show our latest event, and thinking about accessibility from the beginning. So, where are you putting your resources? Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what is a good first step in organization, and perhaps a smaller organization that may be a little bit may not have an in-house dev team, probably don't have a dedicated accessibility person. So what are some first steps that those cultural organizations take in order to understand where they're at in that accessibility spectrum in terms of what their experiences are like, and then look to improve them?
Yeah. So, I mean, two answers. One is like start anywhere is kind of one of the answers. Is one of the things that I love about accessibility is how literally any changes really have a really large impact on people. And you make one small change and it like, changes that person, like it changes people's ways of being able to interact. So there is a feeling of overwhelm of like, where do I even start? And my first suggestion is like quite literally anywhere, whether like regardless of what your job role is, and that will have an impact. And you don't have to, have say from the top and have a big initiative and improvement. You can just write the alt text on an image and make sure that it's accurate. You can just use the right color contrasts, and that'll also help people. So that's my first one of just do anything. The second one is
Mm.
if you're a person who wants a little bit of direction, a good place to start, I would probably say, is that WebA Million report. So I'll show. Do I have access? Where's my slides? Yeah. So go back. Um, nope, wrong direction. Oh, this one. So the WebAIM. I mean, I'm a data nerd without being a data person. Um, like this is the most common errors that have been seen over the last 5 years. So you pick one of them, and you focus on that, and it can improve that. I can bet that you probably have these issues like most people do. And so if you focus on low contrast text, for example, that's the highest one. So just look at the text that you have, and make sure that your colors are good. Missing alt text as well is significant, and that actually bleeds a lot into the empty labels, empty links, and empty buttons. So if you're giving alt text to your images is really good. Another recommendation I would say as well, because it can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you're at a museum or a library where you have literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of images, and you're like, I need to write alt text for all of them.
Mhm.
Narrow your scope down. Don't do your entire database. Start with the newest stuff. Say from here on out, when we upload an image, we will implement alt text. Help yourself out, because it will be an impossible task to do the going backwards. So yeah, so my recommendations would be, yeah, go to the WebAIM to get some guidance as to like where like pick one, and that's where you can start. The second is reduce your scope to make it manageable. So whether that's the scope in terms of like going backwards, or in terms of like your job role, if you're in an organization where you having a lot of difficulty getting other people on board of like accessibility, focus on your job role and what you can do in your context. And then the third one is just do anything, literally just do anything, and it will have a positive impact. Yeah.
Yeah, so a practical application of that, I guess, this is where Google Analytics could be your friend, where you perhaps look at the
Yeah.
most popular pages on your website, and then you run a free Lighthouse report, and you just hit, as you say, there's probably some small changes you could make on those top 10 pages, and that would probably make a big difference for 90% of the users. So yeah.
Yeah. That's a great tip. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got another question. It's a follow-up from Rowan. Um, is AI prompting itself accessible for neurodiverse folks? I've been wondering about this for a while, especially when/if the data the AI is trained on is biased towards neurotypical conversation. That's a really interesting question.
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I know enough about
Mm.
like neurodiversity and how conversationally it might be different between neurotypical and neurodiverse people. So I don't know if I can answer that question. One of the things that we want to be thinking about when it comes to using AI is making sure that the AI itself is accessible. So if you're having on your website, like a chat bot, like an FAQ thing, or, your search is AI powered, and allows users to interact with, you want to make sure that that tool itself is accessible. So things like keyboard accessibility, making sure that the labels are like buttons and links are accurately labeled, and that you're using like headings and text and all that kind of stuff in an appropriate way. Yeah, and then thinking about like the language that you're using as well, I guess, making sure that if you're asking for the user to provide a prompt, making sure that the instructions are clear, for like a clear like reading level, and that could probably help a whole bunch of people as well.
We are almost out of time, so maybe just one more question. And that was, is some AI created access, even if it's not necessarily the best, better than no access if there's simply no budget or time for human-made, say, audio descriptions or alt text?
I guess famously it depends. It depends on what your
Yeah.
intentions and what you're trying to accomplish, right? Like a lot of the time, like these kind of webinars, for example, we use, especially live, we use auto generated captions, right? Because it would be very expensive to run a free webinar like this and hire a transcriber to be doing the captioning while we're speaking, right? So that's a place where we decide to compromise on the AI generated captioning, and hopefully it's mostly accurate.
Mm.
Versus when this gets posted, it's likely that I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but oftentimes like the person who's posting it will look through the transcript and make sure that it's accurate and make sure that it's timed properly and that the words make sense. Um, and so that's where you get human intervention. So I think at the end of the day, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what your plans are, right? Like if that display, that museum display, for example, with the audio description, that you have it there, but then the intention is in a few months' time or an X amount of time to update it with human verified text, then that can indicate your actions one way or the other. Yeah, so I think I would go down to what your intentions are and what your plans are, and yeah, how you can like verify whatever you do have, like, and make sure that it's as accurate as possible. Yeah.
Great. All right. Does anyone have any other questions? We are at time. Now, in the last slide, Maya did put her contact details there, and I'm sure she would not mind anyone reaching out for any
Yeah.
questions that they may have. We are also, as I said at the beginning, sending this recording out to everyone who's registered, and it will be on our YouTube channel with subtitles that will be checked by a human. Please feel free to join us for our upcoming webinars. We are doing a new season, so we have plenty more coming. If you would like to let us know some ideas for some webinars that you would like us to host, feel free to let us know. You can email us admin@ndf.org.nz. Please also visit the website ndf.org.nz and subscribe to our newsletter, because that is where you will be the first to hear of our upcoming sessions and also all the other stuff that we have going on. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure hosting you
Thank
today,
you.
and thank you very much to Maya. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.